When my son tightened his grip on my hand beneath the table, I recognized the signal instantly. 3 quick pulses, controlled and intentional. It was the same code we created when he was only 7, the quiet way he'd ask to leave somewhere without making a scene. Now he was 31, and we were seated at my dining table with his girlfriend of 4 months, a woman named Alicia Drummond. She was casually describing an investment property she was helping some clients purchase in Kelowna. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I'm 63 years old. I spent 22 years with the OP, the Ontario Provincial Police, working financial crime investigations before retiring early. After that, I spent another 11 years consulting for the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. I analyzed fraud cases. I trained investigators. My wife Carol was still in the kitchen finishing the pie. A moment later, she walked in laughing, placing the dish on the table while asking Alicia how the drive up from Toronto had been. My son Nathan laughed at something Alicia said and reached over to touch her hand. On the surface, he looked perfectly content. Nathan had always been good at that. A strong poker face. He definitely inherited that from me. But he had also squeezed my hand 3 times. We came up with that signal together years ago, after a Christmas dinner when he was in 2nd grade. His uncle, my brother Douglas, who could talk endlessly about municipal water infrastructure, had trapped Nathan in the hallway for nearly 45 minutes explaining pipe systems. From that evening on, 3 squeezes meant, I need your help getting out of this, but don't make it obvious. It was our private code. We hadn't used it in more than 10 years. Yet tonight, he used it again. Right after Alicia finished explaining what she did for a living, she described herself as a private wealth facilitator, not a financial advisor, not an investment broker, a private wealth facilitator. She said the title with the polished confidence of someone who had practiced it many times. According to her, she worked with a small circle of high-net-worth clients, helping them move their money into alternative asset structures that traditional banks simply didn't offer. Real estate, yes, but that wasn't all. She also talked about private lending pools, agricultural land trusts in the Okanagan, and energy infrastructure partnerships in Alberta. There's an entire world of returns out there that most people never even realize exists, she explained. Her voice carried warmth rather than arrogance, like someone kindly sharing a valuable secret. I nodded thoughtfully and asked what kind of oversight those structures operated under. She smiled, an excellent smile, calm and reassuring, and said that was actually one of their biggest advantages. With less regulatory friction, capital could move faster, and that's where the real profits were made. Less regulatory friction, I repeated politely. Exactly, she replied. Carol was watching me by then. After 36 years of marriage, she could read my face the way only a lifelong partner can. She could tell something was turning over behind my eyes, something I was trying very hard not to show, without making it obvious. She stood up and asked Alicia if she'd like to take a quick look at the back garden before the daylight faded. Nathan waited until the back door shut. Then he leaned forward, resting both elbows on the table, and looked at me the same way he used to when he was a teenager, about to say something difficult. I know what you're thinking, he said. Tell me what you think I'm thinking, I replied. You think something about this isn't right. I think I'd rather hear it from you, I said calmly. How long has this been going on? He rubbed the back of his neck. I could tell he hadn't been sleeping well. The faint darkness under his eyes, the way he'd been quieter than usual during dinner, laughing just a second after everyone else. She moved in with me about 6 weeks ago, he said. Her lease ended, and she said she needed a couple of months to figure out a new place. I didn't think anything of it. Honestly, I wanted her to. All right. But then she started talking about my RRSP. He stared down at the table as he said it. She told me I was leaving money on the table, said she could help me restructure it into something that would grow 3 times faster. All perfectly legal, just not something mainstream advisors would ever suggest because they make their commissions keeping people stuck in mutual funds. I kept my voice steady and neutral. How much has she asked you to move? She hasn't asked yet. She's been easing into it, he said, showing me documents, prospectuses. They're for something called the Lakeshore Private Capital Fund. He explained that everything looked legitimate, professional logos, a registered office address in Vancouver, performance charts supposedly stretching back 8 years. Nathan, I said quietly. How much is in your RRSP? He held my gaze. 240,000. I let that number settle in the silence for a moment. She doesn't know what I used to do, I said. It wasn't really a question. I told her you were retired, OP, he replied. She said that was impressive. He paused for a second. But the way she said it, it felt like she already knew, and just didn't care. Like it never crossed her mind that it mattered. That told me something. Either she was extremely confident, or dangerously careless. In my experience, those two traits often belong to the same person, just at different points in the same career path. Has she shown you any contracts? I asked. Anything she wants you to sign? She emailed something last week, he said. A subscription agreement. That's what she called it. She said there was no pressure, but the next intake window for the fund closes at the end of the month. Artificial urgency. The oldest trick in the fraud handbook. The closing window. The final seat on the plane. The once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that disappears tomorrow. Real investment funds don't operate with intake deadlines that vanish in 3 weeks. I need you to forward me that email, I said. Tonight, before she leaves. Dad. Nathan, I interrupted gently, keeping my voice low. I'm not telling you who you should or shouldn't be with. I'm just asking you to let me look at a document. That's all. He nodded slowly. A moment later, Carol and Alicia came back inside, laughing about a neighborhood cat that had apparently wandered through the garden beds. For the rest of the evening, Alicia was warm and effortless. She helped clear the dishes without anyone asking. She remembered that Carol liked her tea without milk. She even asked me about a case I'd mentioned earlier, a real estate fraud ring in Barrie that had made the news, and she listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking thoughtful follow-up questions that sounded surprisingly well-informed. She was skilled, extremely skilled. After they left, Carol stood quietly at the kitchen sink for a long moment without speaking. You noticed it too, I finally said. I noticed the moment you froze when she said less regulatory friction, Carol replied. That's the look you get when you're deciding how to deal with something. I need to make a few calls tomorrow. Carol wiped her hands with the dish towel and turned to face me. How serious do you think this is? I don't know yet, I said honestly. But Nathan has $240,000 sitting in an RRSP, and his girlfriend who moved in 6 weeks ago is guiding him toward an unregistered investment vehicle with a deadline at the end of the month. Carol placed the dish towel down with careful precision. All right, she said calmly. What do you need me to do? That's what 36 years together gives you. You don't have to explain every detail of a problem. You only have to name the weight of it, and the other person understands exactly what that means. The email Nathan forwarded later that night was 17 pages long. It looked polished, clean formatting, professional fonts, a watermarked letterhead from something called Lakeshore Private Capital Corporation, along with a registered address on West Georgia Street in Vancouver. Near the end was a disclosure section written in thick, technical legal language that most readers would skim past without a second thought. I didn't skim it. I sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours after Carol went to bed and read every line. The performance chart claiming 8 years of returns referenced no auditor. The section about investor protections mentioned something called the Lakeshore Capital Investor Assurance Program, which supposedly existed in a separate document that wasn't attached and wasn't linked anywhere. The minimum subscription was $25,000, with a preferred allocation for commitments above $100,000. The fund's stated strategy involved private credit facilities secured by physical assets, a phrase vague enough to mean almost anything or absolutely nothing. When I looked up the registered address on West Georgia Street, it turned out to be a business registration service, the kind of place that charges $40 a month to receive mail and forward it somewhere else. Not an office, not a real firm, and I knew exactly 2 people I could call. The first was a woman named Sandra Pay. She had spent years leading white-collar investigations for the RCMP in Toronto before moving over to the Ontario Securities Commission. Over the years our paths had crossed on 3 separate cases. She didn't owe me any favors, but we respected each other's work, and when she saw my name on her phone she picked up. The second was Paul Trevick. For 2 decades, he'd been a forensic accountant for the Crown Attorney's Office in Hamilton, before starting his own consulting practice. Paul had the rare ability to study a financial document and within 20 minutes tell you whether the numbers were honest or carefully designed to mislead. I sent both of them a text that night, asking if they had time to talk in the morning. Sandra called first, at 8:15. I gave her the name, Lakeshore Private Capital Corporation, the West Georgia Street address, and Alicia Drummond's name. She was silent for a moment. "Give me an hour," she said. Paul rang at 8:45. I read sections of the subscription agreement to him over the phone. Twice he stopped me and asked me to repeat specific lines. When I finished, there was a long pause, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Gordon," he finally said, "that section about asset-backed security, the physical assets they claim are securing those credit facilities. There's no description of what those assets actually are. None," he continued, his tone tightening. "A legitimate private credit fund would include a schedule. They'd identify the collateral. There's nothing here. It's empty wording, a frame without a painting. You could hang anything in it, or nothing at all. If someone invested, and the fund later claimed the assets depreciated or the credit facility defaulted, there'd be no way to verify whether those assets ever existed in the first place." Sandra called back at 9:50. "She's real," Sandra said. And there was a certain flatness in her voice that told me this situation wasn't going to be straightforward. "Alicia Drummond. I am 34 years old, grew up in Sudbury, studied business at Laurier, worked 3 years at a legitimate wealth management firm in Mississauga before she was terminated." "Why?" I asked. "The firm filed a complaint with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority. The case is closed now, but the record still exists." "What was the complaint?" "Inappropriate relationship with a client." Sandra paused briefly before continuing. "The client was a widower, 68 years old. He moved $70,000 into a private fund on her recommendation before the firm discovered it. The fund wasn't registered. Every dollar was gone. The client chose not to file criminal charges. Pressure from the family, most likely. From what I understood, he felt humiliated." I shut my eyes for a moment. There it was, a trial run. A smaller rehearsal of the exact same scheme, practiced once, adjusted, then carried out again with more precision. "Is Lakeshore registered anywhere?" I asked. "No," Sandra replied. "There's no fund with that name registered in any province. So she's running an outright scam. That's what it looks like." The real issue now was whether we could gather enough evidence to act before she collected the money and quietly shut everything down. Sandra paused for a second. "How close is she to asking for the money?" "She's already sent the subscription agreement. The end of the month is the deadline." "And the exposure?" "My son's retirement savings, $240,000. Another silence followed, though this one was shorter. Sandra and I had worked together for years. We'd both faced families sitting across the table from us after losing everything. But this time, the situation felt uncomfortably personal, closer than either of us liked. "All right," she finally said. "We need to move carefully here. If she senses anything, she'll vanish." We had both seen this pattern before. People like her always prepared an escape plan. Clean personal histories, barely any physical presence, and the ability to reinvent themselves in another city within 48 hours. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "I need Nathan to agree to meet with her one more time, and I need that conversation recorded, audio of her pitching the investment and asking him to commit the money." "In Ontario," she continued, "a person can record a conversation they're part of without telling the other person. If Nathan meets her and records it himself, his phone, his conversation, then that recording is legally admissible. Nathan's going to have questions about all of this." "I'm sure he will," she said. "But Gordon, he came to you first. That was the signal. Deep down, he already knows something isn't right. He's just been waiting for you to show him what to do next." She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, I drove over to Nathan's apartment. He opened the door wearing a simple t-shirt, his hair still damp from a recent shower, and the look on his face made it obvious he'd spent the entire morning on edge. I took a seat on his couch and laid everything out for him. The West Georgia address, the auditor who didn't exist, Paul's breakdown of the subscription agreement, the earlier complaint in Mississauga, the widower who had lost $70,000 and felt too humiliated to pursue charges. Nathan barely moved while I spoke, He absorbed every word in silence. "She told me she loved me," he finally said. There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet heaviness, the kind of silence people fall into when they begin to see the hidden structure of something they once trusted without question. "I know she did," I answered. "You mentioned it last week." The first time he'd said it, I hadn't responded. There was nothing I could say that would change how that realization landed. It was something he had to sit with on his own. After a while, he lifted his head. "So what do I need to do?" I explained the recording plan. I told him he'd have to meet her again, and let her go through the entire pitch. Let her ask for the commitment. Let her name the amount. Let her describe the fund and the timeline in her own words. Most importantly, he had to stay calm, no sudden reactions, nothing that might tip her off or make her suspect anything had changed. "Do you think you can handle that?" I asked. He met my eyes with the same steady gaze he'd had since he was a boy, the one that never wavered when things got difficult. "I spent 6 weeks trying to convince myself I was wrong about what I already knew," he said quietly. "Yeah, Dad. I can sit across from her for an hour." Later that evening, he called her. He told her he'd been going over the subscription agreement seriously and had a few questions before making a final decision. He said he'd prefer to talk in person rather than going back and forth through messages. She suggested meeting for coffee on Thursday afternoon. Her tone was warm, relaxed, almost pleased, perfectly measured to keep him comfortable and unsuspecting. On Thursday morning, I drove back to Nathan's place. We sat together at his kitchen table while I carefully walked him through the details again. "Keep your phone in the front pocket of your shirt," I told him. "Screen facing inward. Start the recording from the voice memo app before you go in. Let her do most of the talking. Don't hurry the conversation. If she stopped speaking, let the quiet linger for a moment. People have a natural urge to fill silence. Ask simple follow-up questions in an even, neutral voice. Don't challenge her. Don't sound too eager either. Just be a man who seems close to saying yes." Nathan nodded as I walked him through it all. "How are you holding up?" I asked. He glanced toward the window before answering. "Honestly, angry, but the calm kind of angry. The kind where you just want to finish what needs to be done." "That's the right kind," I told him. "Stay there." I drove back home and sat in the kitchen with Carol. We didn't say much. She brewed tea, and the two of us listened quietly to the radio while we waited. At 4:17, my phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. "Done. I have everything. I'll call you in 10 minutes. When the phone rang, his voice sounded steady but thin, the way it does when the last of the adrenaline is still draining out of your system. He said she had been precise and thorough. She laid out the structure of the fund. She talked about the expected returns, 18 to 22% a year. That number alone sat so far outside the range of any legitimate investment that it practically acted like a signature. She also explained the intake deadline. She told him about a preferred allocation he could secure if he committed more than $100,000. She described the wire transfer process and even gave him the account details. The account, she said, was with a credit union in British Columbia. According to her, Nathan told me, the fund managers prefer working outside the big banks because transactions move faster. She had also assured him that once the transfer was made, his money would be working for him within 72 hours. 72 hours. I knew exactly what that meant. By the time anyone discovered the fund didn't exist and the account had already been emptied, 72 hours would be more than enough time to push the money through enough channels to make it almost impossible to trace or recover. That evening I called Sandra and told her we had the recording. She asked Nathan to send the audio file through a secure channel, which he did before the hour was up. She listened to it overnight. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30. "It's enough," she said. "We're moving on today." I didn't ask for the specifics of what happened next. That part wasn't my responsibility, and it certainly wasn't Nathan's either. What I can tell you is this. Alicia Drummond was taken into custody at Nathan's apartment on Friday morning, just before 8 o'clock. I know the exact time because Nathan called me while it was unfolding. He was standing out in the hallway, still in his socks, just outside his own front door. His voice was low when he spoke. "They're inside, Dad," he said quietly. "It's happening." "Good," I replied. "Go put on your shoes. Step outside for a bit. Get some air." The investigation that followed uncovered a much wider pattern. Alicia had carried out versions of the same operation in 2 other provinces. The Lakeshore Private Capital Fund was only one of 3 fraudulent setups she had used. When investigators finished tracing the victims, they could confirm there were 8 in total. Combined losses came to more than $900,000. Some of those victims had already wired their money long before Nathan ever crossed paths with her. He turned out to be the first one who walked away without losing a single dollar. 2 weeks later, Nathan came over for Sunday dinner again. It was just the 3 of us. Him, Carol, and me. Carol made her roast chicken, the same one she'd been cooking since Nathan was still in diapers. We sat at the same table where months of careful manipulation had nearly succeeded. Nathan didn't talk much through most of the meal. But it wasn't the tight, nervous silence from before. This was different, quieter, steadier, the kind of calm that settles in after something hard is finally over. When dinner was done, he helped Carol with the dishes without being asked, the same way he had when he was younger. After she went upstairs to call her sister, Nathan returned to the kitchen and sat across from me at the table, wrapping both hands around his coffee mug. "I keep wondering how I didn't see it," he said. "You did see it," I answered. "That's why you sent the signal." He thought about that for a moment. "I mean earlier," he said, "before it got that far." I looked at my son, the same boy who once needed a quiet hand signal to escape one of his uncle's endless lectures about water infrastructure, now grown into a man who could sit calmly across from someone trying to dismantle his financial future and hold himself together long enough to help stop her. "Nathan," I said, "she was very good at what she did, and she'd done it many times before. She had perfected the approach over time. She understood exactly which emotional switches to flip: affection, trust, the quiet promise of being part of something exclusive that others weren't invited into. That isn't a failure of your intelligence. It's the result of someone investing real effort, skill, and planning into manipulating you. Of course it doesn't feel good. It shouldn't. But here's the part you should actually hold on to. The moment your instincts told you something wasn't right, you paid attention. You didn't bury that feeling completely. You reached out. That single decision is what made everything else possible." He gave a slow nod. "Most people don't," I said. "That's the tragedy in cases like this. Most people feel that uneasy signal in their gut and convince themselves they're just imagining things. They worry about seeming paranoid. They're embarrassed to speak up. They don't want to look foolish, or they don't want the relationship to turn into what it's clearly becoming. So they wait. And while they're waiting, the window closes, the money moves, and the person disappears." For a moment we just sat there, listening to Carol's voice upstairs as she talked on the phone, and the soft tapping of rain beginning against the kitchen window. "Is she going to prison?" Nathan asked. "That's something the courts will decide," I said. "But I can tell you this. The evidence is strong. The recording is clear, and there are 8 other people who now have a chance at some form of accountability because you didn't let her finish what she started." He sat quietly for a moment. "Then I'm glad I texted you," he said. "So am I," I replied. "And Nathan, you came to me. That matters. Don't ever stop doing that." He smiled at that. A small but genuine one. We stayed there until Carol came back downstairs, and the rain outside grew heavier. Eventually the 3 of us moved into the living room and put on an old hockey game that neither Nathan nor I actually cared about. Carol drifted off to sleep in the armchair, her feet tucked underneath her. It was just a normal evening at home, and after everything that had happened, normal felt exactly right. I want to say this clearly, speaking as someone who has spent more than 30 years working in financial crime. Fraud schemes like this persist for one simple reason: they work. They succeed not because people are foolish, but because they are trusting, willing to believe in connection, in affection, in the possibility that something good might enter their lives. By the time the conversation turns to investing, the person on the other side already feels part of an authentic relationship, and in many ways it genuinely has been. The hours spent together, the kindness exchanged, the sense of being understood, all of it sets the stage. Often the warning signs only become obvious afterward, or to someone observing from the outside. Promised returns that seem unusually high, investments claiming more than 8 or 9% a year, funds that cannot be verified through provincial securities regulators, office addresses that are nothing more than mail forwarding services, pressure tied to looming deadlines, or resistance when you suggest having a lawyer or financial advisor review the documents. In Canada, investment funds are required to be registered with provincial securities regulators. Anyone can confirm the legitimacy of a fund or advisor through the Canadian Securities Administrators National Database at securities-administrators.ca. The process takes about 3 minutes and doesn't cost a cent. Those 3 minutes might end up being the most valuable 3 minutes of your financial life. And there's something else worth remembering. If someone in your life reaches out to you, no matter how small or unusual the signal might seem, take it seriously and listen. Nathan used a simple hand gesture we created years ago to solve a problem a 7-year-old once had. He used it because some instinct inside him recognized the danger before his mind was ready to say the words out loud. Part of him knew he needed someone outside the situation to see what was really happening. That instinct is more valuable than any contract or financial statement you will ever read. Protect it in the people you care about, and learn to trust it in yourself. In our case, we didn't lose a single dollar, but we came dangerously close. And in the end, the difference came down to a 31-year-old man sitting at the dinner table and quietly squeezing his father's hand 3 times. If your instincts are telling you that something isn't right, don't ignore it. That feeling is never meaningless. It's your mind trying to protect you. Listen to it, talk to someone you trust, and take a moment to look deeper before it's too late. And if stories like this help you stay aware and protect the people you love, consider subscribing to the channel A Father's Wrath. Your support helps us keep sharing real lessons, real warnings, and real stories that might help someone else see the signs before it's too late.